Imagine you're watching a political commentator just absolutely lose their mind on YouTube.
Oh, yeah, we've all seen those.
Right. Like veins popping, voice cracking. They are furiously screaming into a microphone that the entire country is doomed and, the public has just completely lost its mind.
Right.
And the craziest part, their proof that the apocalypse is upon us is just that the voters participated in a peaceful, incredibly boring, moderate local election.
Yeah, it's a massive disconnect.
It really is. So today, we are unpacking this bizarre modern phenomenon. Like, why does the quiet reality of everyday voters drive internet populists completely insane? Welcome to this deep dive.
Thanks. Yeah, today we are looking at a really fascinating piece of analysis. It's titled Irish Democracy and the Resilience of the Institutional Center.
Which sounds very academic, but it's actually super relatable.
Right, exactly. The author actually uses a very specific case study for this. Yeah. It's a reaction video by a YouTube creator named Adrian Logan FTW. And they use this video to sort of crack open a much larger conversation.
So we aren't just doing a recap of local Irish politics today.
Oh, no, not at all. We're using this one commentator's, well, his meltdown, honestly, to explore the invisible mechanics that keep a democracy stable. The structural math of voting systems and the psychology behind why online echo chambers just shatter so spectacularly when they hit the real world.
Jump right in and look at a direct response to these elections. Right after the results came out, YouTube commentator Adrian Logan delivered what can really only be described as a visible expression of pure frustration. He essentially lamented that the electorate had voted with the establishment, and he outright urged viewers to, quote, vote for the most radical people that we can find. He seemed genuinely bewildered that voters backed moderate mainstream parties instead of the radical alternatives he favors. And, it's a very common populist narrative. This idea that if the establishment wins, well, the system must be fundamentally broken, or the voters are just simply uneducated. But is that actually true? Well, in this explainer, we're going to peel back the layers of this whole narrative. We'll look at the post-election meltdown, how the electorate actually voted, Ireland's PRSTV voting system, the reality of institutional trust, the psychology of punditry, and finally, the ultimate democratic paradox. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the post-election meltdown, analyzing the commentary. Notice how these specific claims line up. To Logan, any vote for a traditional, moderate, or even center-left party, well, that's just a clear symptom of a totally broken, corrupt system. He literally claims it's ridiculous that the establishment party Fine Gael returned a seat. He argues the electorate have learned nothing after what he views as a legacy of systemic failure. And his ultimate solution for all of this? Just abandon the status quo entirely. Basically, to him, any vote that doesn't completely shake the system to its core is seen as a total failure.
But rhetoric is one thing, right? Reality is a whole different ballgame. Let's move into Section 2, how the electorate actually voted, looking at the hard election data.
When we step outside that online echo chamber and look at the actual outcomes in these two by-elections, a completely different picture emerges. Take Galway West, for example. It was a really tight race between a centrist Fine Gael candidate and a right-leaning agrarian populist from independent Ireland. Ultimately, the centrist won out via ballot transfers. Meanwhile, over in Dublin Central, despite all these big predictions of a massive surge for anti-establishment factions, the seat was comfortably claimed by the Social Democrats. So, the absolute crucial takeaway here is this. Voters actively, knowingly, chose stability, proven legislative track records, and structured policy over radical disruption.
And this brings us to a super important number, 40%. That was the voter turnout for these by-elections. Now, commentators like Logan, they point to this low turnout as definitive proof of a broken, apathetic system. But historically, and politically speaking, that's kind of a misreading of the data. Look, by-elections don't change the ultimate leadership of a country, so turnout naturally takes a dip. But more importantly, a 40% turnout usually indicates a lack of existential panic among the broader public. When populist factions fail to manufacture enough anger to drive a massive high-turnout protest vote, the organized, moderate political machines naturally secure the mandate. It's not necessarily apathy, it's an absence of crisis-level outrage. People were just kinda okay staying home, maybe watching TV, rather than rushing to the barricades.
So how exactly do these moderate candidates pull it off? That brings us to Section 3. Ireland's PRSTV voting system, and how it essentially engineers stability.
To really get these results, you got to understand the nuts and bolts of it. Ireland uses proportional representation with a single transferable vote, or PRSTV. And this system brilliantly illustrates why radical candidates tend to struggle there. Under PRSTV,
It's very rarely enough to just have a loud, passionate, highly polarized core base. To actually win a seat, a candidate almost always has to build broad consensus to capture those second and third preference votes from everyday citizens who maybe didn't pick them first.
Let's break down how this works mathematically, especially in a race like Galway West. Step 1, a radical or populist candidate secures their passionate first preference base, so they look really strong right out of the gate. But step 2 is where the magic of PR-STV really kicks in. As the lower-performing candidates get eliminated, their voters' second and third choices are distributed. And moderates, well, they capture these broader transfers simply because they are less polarizing. Then step 3, the consensus candidate overtakes the populist and wins the seat. The system is literally, mathematically, designed to reward cooperation and penalize polarization.
And, this mechanical preference for consensus, it's not some random accident. It really reflects the broader culture. Let's look at Section 4, the reality of institutional trust, examining the broad data.
When we stack up this populist rhetoric of a quote-unquote failing state against the actual empirical data, things look pretty different. According to OECD surveys, Ireland actually has higher than average trust in its civil services, local government, and legal systems compared to a lot of its Western peers. On top of that, consider how voters treat the fringes. Yes, absolutely, there is intense, healthy debate happening about real crises like housing and healthcare, for sure. But when Irish voters want to punish a government, they don't try to tear down the entire democratic structure. They simply shift their votes to other credible institutional parties like the Social Democrats or Sinn Féin. They're looking for policy reform, not the destruction of the state. So if the democracy is actually functioning in a mature, stable way, why such an emotional meltdown from the pundit class? Well, that takes us to Section 5, the psychology of punditry, ego, and echo chambers.
To really understand this outrage, we need to talk about something called the false consensus effect. This is basically a cognitive bias where a person overestimates just how much the rest of the world shares their specific beliefs. Now, for alternative media commentators who literally spend their days inside highly active, self-reinforcing online echo chambers, this bias is massively magnified. They look around their digital feeds and logically conclude that, hey, everyone agrees the system needs to be destroyed. But when the actual votes are counted, the hard data completely shatters that illusion.
And when that illusion inevitably shatters, well, that's when the psychological defense mechanisms kick in. Think about it. If a commentator actually accepts that the public knowingly rejected their ideas, that is a huge blow to the ego. So deflection, like attacking the voters themselves, can serve as a really powerful coping mechanism. Claiming the voters learn nothing or are just deluded protects that inner narrative. By framing any mainstream success as inherent corruption, they create this protective intellectual trap. It ensures their moral high ground remains totally unassailable, regardless of what the actual election outcome is.
Which brings us right to our final section, Section 6, the ultimate democratic paradox, and the reality of outrage.
Because here is the central irony of this whole explainer. Populist commentators absolutely rely on high turnout protest votes and systemic anger to validate their platform and really their entire presence. But when the vast majority of a population chooses to just quietly go about their lives, engage in standard political processes, and elect steady, policy-driven candidates, it completely starves that narrative. The intense frustration we saw at the very beginning of this explainer isn't necessarily about a deep love for the country. It's the visible frustration of a commentator realizing that their curated digital echo chamber simply does not dictate the actual destiny of the nation.
I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on the next time you're scrolling through your feeds. Just how often is the fiery political outrage we see online an accurate reflection of society? And how often is it actually just a commentator's psychological defense mechanism desperately protecting their own ego? It's a lens that kind of completely changes how we consume political media, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the narrative.